I challenged him and tell him, look, why don't you go and do it in a laboratory the way I was tested?
My opinion has always been that parapsychologists, no matter how well funded, would not be able to properly judge where someone has set out to purposely deceive them. And I had come to the conclusion that the only way to show them would be to perpetrate an outright hoax by introducing some tricksters into the laboratory that I knew I could trust.
I read Randy's book, The Truth About Uri Geller. And from that book, I was able to put methods together for bending objects myself. And I created many of my own methods to the point to where kids in high school were stealing silverware and bringing it to me to bend. And I got so good at it that I'm not sure why, but I wrote Randy a letter and I said, look, if you ever need a kid to try to fool scientists, I'd be happy to do so.
After I read The Magic of Uri Geller and got to be pretty proficient as a psychic metal bender myself, I took it upon myself to reach out to James Randi.
Michael, you must be a psychic.
And causing that to twist 180 degrees, just like that.
Very shortly after, a very substantial amount of money had been offered to a university to do parapsychological tests.
MacLab was funded by James McDonnell, and he said, go out and find me some star subjects. And then that job fell to a scientist called Peter Phillips.
We were told that there were 300 applicants, and the MacLab ended up focusing on only 2 subjects, myself and Steve Shaw.
At that point, Project Alpha was ready to take off.
I fly into St. Louis, and we didn't know what we were getting into. We didn't know if they were going to have one-way mirrors with cameras hidden behind them. We had absolutely no clue what it was we were getting into.
I was 17 years old. It was my first semester as a senior in high school. I'm about to pull some basic magic on some people that should be very well skilled and could very likely see through this quickly. I might have just stepped in a little bit over my head at that time.
I'm Peter Phillips, and here with me is Mark Schaefer. The tape that you're about to see consists of a series of episodes suggestive of psychokinesis. The subjects in these experiments are 2 men of about 21, ME and SS. They presented themselves to us originally as psychic metal benders.
I wrote to Professor Phillips in order to advise him on how he should observe the alpha kids. As a matter of fact, I sent him a list of 11 rules in order to keep control of an experiment.
Don't allow the subjects to alter the rules established for the tests. Don't accept excuses like the vibrations are right or I don't feel right. And above all,
you need a professional magician to keep you straightened out on what might be trickery.
it was very quickly, though, that Steve and I tried to almost line by line get them to violate every one of those caveats in one way, shape, or form.
Mike, sitting to your right and dressed in white, has just picked up a spoon that he will attempt to influence.
One of Randy's caveats was mark every item with an indelible mark or a scratch that couldn't be replicated, something that was permanent and it was something that we couldn't duplicate on the spot. The parapsychologists, in their infinite wisdom, decided that they would simply use paper tags with string.
Can we get this tag off here?
Sure. Just slide it off me.
We took these paper hanging tags off of the spoons to make them easier to work with. As everybody was focusing on one spoon, it was a simple matter to lean on the control spoon and later switch those two tags so the control spoon looked like the experimental spoon.
Yeah, it's markedly different. Of course it is. It just went down and stood up.
It didn't feel like a thing.
Like anything at all, but there it is.
I saw it.
We truly believe that if scientists went in with a pro-biased opinion and the majority of the parapsychologists were doing just that, they would not use proper science.
And if we could replicate what Geller and SRI had done, in essence, in terms of established scientific protocol on testing a psychic, we could undermine Geller's claims of being deemed legitimate by scientists.
We have been working, first of all, to establish the range of abilities that Mike and Steve have, because these have apparently included being able to move small solid objects across a tabletop, influencing a variety of metal objects such as keys and metal bars and metal rods, sometimes touching and sometimes at a distance, and also influencing photographic film.
We were trying to get the parapsychologists to break their own rules. We were then informing Randi of the ways that we were beating the tests. Randi, in turn, was then communicating back to the Mac lab how to safeguard their tests so that we couldn't beat them any longer. Needless to say, it got very complicated as we were forced to become more and more resourceful.
Another device designed to elicit PK in a visible manner was a lightweight rotor that was mounted atop a thin metal spindle under a glass dome.
One of the tests was a spindle with a small rotor on top that had a glass dome that fit over the top of this to protect it. Our jobs were to try to move that rotor without, obviously, removing the glass dome. I thought that was a pretty good test.
And then it's connected to the base real well.
I really was stumped. Then I look over in the side of the room and Steve was concentrating on the rotor. And the rotor starts to move.
Here you see Steve influencing the rotor. He's causing it to rotate clockwise.
And they said, well, to make sure there's no air currents or anything like that, can you make it move to the right? So I start concentrating, and slowly it starts reversing, and it goes to the right.
I had no idea how he was getting this to work.
And if you look carefully, the rotor is moving counterclockwise.
And so Mike turns to me and he says, hey, would you like to go get a drink at the machine? Now, I know what he wants. I know he wants to know how I just did this. So I go with him down there and he says, Steve, he says, how the heck did you just do that? And I said, Mike, after all these hours of sitting in that room and concentrating, I just found out that I'm really a psychic.
I think I promptly threw him up against the wall at that point and wanted to know. And it turned out it was a very simple deception. Shortly after that hallway conversation, both of us could magically make the rotor move any direction that we wanted to, and the Mac Lab personnel never caught on.
I don't believe they're tricking us, especially based on the research that we've done in the last year, where we have exerted as tight a control condition as we could think of, even in consultation with magicians, to see if the influence holds up. And we have found evidence that it does, not as strongly under these control conditions. It's as if somehow the extra controls seem to inhibit it, but still an effect persists.
Over the course of Alpha, the controls did get significantly tougher. And the tighter the controls got, the lower the results got, but their faith in us never diminished.
We do not claim that this tape provides incontrovertible evidence of PK. We regard it rather as a provisional tape, imperfect, but still with much to offer.
It was over a 4-year period. It was about 180 hours total that we were at the Mac lab. And after all those years of convincing people that I was a genuine psychic, I had a huge doubt about what we were doing and how it was going to affect these people. And it came about when there was a BBC producer, a guy by the name of Tony Edwards, who said he wanted to capture our abilities on tape.
We had taken him from a point where he was an utter skeptic. We had then gotten him, by getting to know him and demonstrating our abilities off camera, to become a believer.
Randy gave him the same 11 caveats that he had given the Mac lab. The difference was, Tony took a look at those and said, okay, I'm gonna follow these because I want to convince Randy. If I can convince Randy, I can convince the rest of the world.
We were all trying to record that elusive bend. As witnesses, a conjurer, 2 metallurgists, and 3 simultaneously recording TV cameras, conditions the benders were happy to accept. After 6 hours recording, nothing.
Damn it. We sat there all day with Tony. Nothing happened. Absolutely nothing happened during the day. The moment the cameras went off at the end of the day, we bent everything in the laboratory, absolutely everything.
It's almost as if he had the Holy Grail in his fingertips and he let it drop.
Tony Edwards lost it. Started screaming, started crying, ranting, raving. Randy's the devil. It's Randy's fault that I couldn't get this on this tape. I shouldn't have listened to Randy. I shouldn't have followed Randy's advice. It's his fault.
The man had a mental breakdown.
It was scary for 2 young kids to realize that we had hurt somebody like that.
And it was at that point, I think, Steve and I realized we can't do this anymore. We can't be responsible for this kind of psychological damage by our ability to trick somebody.
And Randy said, it's just a couple more months. We have this TV show coming up, and that's when we want to tell the world that you're not real.
Randy, he's really the general. You know, the general's rarely on the front lines anyway. And sometimes he's sending his minions to do his good works, but always at a distance. He's the one at the strategy table. He's got the vision for what will come.
The big day comes, the one that Mike and I have been waiting for. We're going to reveal that everything is a hoax.
I'm going to ask these 2 gentlemen a very simple, direct question. Can you tell us, how do you do it?
As they walked up to the microphone, I said, it's very simple.
Well, to be quite honest, we cheat.
And the flash bulbs started going off and the murmur started up inside of the audience. And Steve and I actually then at that point admitted that Project Alpha and us as psychics was nothing more than a bit of illusion.
Magician, amazing Randy. You have him now on the phone. Go ahead, you have the last word.
But I was wondering what he thought about the claims that this was sort of an unethical way of carrying out this experiment, and whether or not it's going to affect the scientific community and the parapsychologists negatively.
I'm happy to say that the president of the Parapsychological Association described it as a magnificent experiment that needed to be done and from which the results of may benefit everybody. And I think that's what we headed out to do.
We also should point out that the director of that program thought it was a very lousy thing to do.
Oh, no.
He was quoted as saying that you probably set back the study of it and that it really...
If Philip said that, then my answer to my having set back the study of parapsychology is no. They tried to set it back. I brought it into the 20th century.
I felt really bad. they truly believed in these things. And I thought that if they had realized they had been fooled by somebody, that they'd be more cautious in the future. But I felt bad that I had fooled them.